Nice crowd. Okay, everybody, welcome. My name is Alex Nguyen from the City Manager's Office, and thank you for coming tonight for this public forum to discuss the Police Department's policy for using license plate readers or automated license plate readers. So I want to begin just asking a quick question about how people who are here tonight prepared for this meeting. We posted a lot of information on the city's website more than 1 month ago, so I'd like to get a semblance and see how many people actually looked at the information. Awesome. How many people actually read the 2-page draft policy? Awesome. How many people read NCRIC's privacy policy? And how many people read the ACLU's position paper?
Is there a check?
Yes. Well, that's great. So I have with me, because it's so short, the 2-page draft policy. I only have about 20 copies. I'll pass it around. If you need it, take one. If you don't, pass it along. And maybe you can share with a neighbor, because we may have more need for that. So I'm going to introduce our panelists really quickly, and then I'm going to tell you how we're going to try to run this meeting. So we have, representing our police department, Captain David Boersma right here, Police Chief Paul Roleri, and from NCRIC, which is Northern California Regional Information Intelligence Center, Ryan Rodriguez. And with the ACLU, we have Matt Cagle. Cagle? Correct? Okay. And so what we're going to do is, we have our Vice Mayor here, Marilyn Ezzy Ashcraft, and Councilmember Lena Tam. So in a moment, I'm going to invite Councilmember Lena Tam to give some opening comments, and we will have the formal presentations. They will run no more than 5 minutes each. I will then gauge it and see if any of the panelists, and we only have 3 formal presentations, if any of the panelists need a formal rebuttal period, we will give them 2 minutes each. But what we really want to do is turn it out to all of you to have questions, answers, discussion, debate, comments. I'm sure there will be plenty of that. So with that, I'm going to ask Councilmember Lena Tam to come up.
Thank you, Alex. I also want to extend my appreciation for your participation in this evening's forum. Last year, on October 1st, the City Council had unanimously directed the city staff to seek funding to purchase license plate readers for our police department. And just prior to that, some council members had attended a number of community and neighborhood meetings, basically to understand the community's concerns over some of the high-profile crimes that we were hearing about in the neighborhood. And in reviewing the crime statistics, we were finding that we saw an uptick on property crimes, primarily auto thefts. In fact, Councilmember Daysog, who was at one of those meetings, he himself was a victim of an auto theft. And in discussions with my council colleagues from other cities, San Leandro, Piedmont, and Oakland, they had advised me that one of the more effective investigative tools for their police departments were automated license plate readers. And clearly there are public policy considerations on the use and storage of data from automated license plate readers, and it was important to spend the time to hear from the community, time that we don't usually have at a city council meeting. And so this evening's forum was made possible primarily with Chief Roleri, because when he was appointed as chief, he committed to run the police department in an open, transparent, and collaborative manner, and helped organize this evening's forum with city staff to get input from the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center and the American Civil Liberties Union and our residents on how to shape his department's policy on the use of automated license plate readers. he will be incorporating the input that he gets tonight and through the various community responses into a policy that he'll present to the City Council at a later date. So tonight, Vice Mayor Ezzy Ashcraft, myself, will just be in a listening mode, and we will make sure that the policies that we hear are reflective of what we are seeing in the community's responses to automated license plate readers. And at this point, we will be happy to answer questions later or to be responsive to any concerns that you may have. Thank you.
Captain Borsman. Good evening. Again, I'm Captain David Borsma. I'm responsible for the Police Department's Bureau of Services, and what I'd like to do is just provide a brief overview of automated license plate readers for those of you that aren't necessarily sure what the technology is all about. Basically, from our perspective, I'm sure you're going to see some different viewpoints up here, and I've prepared just a very brief PowerPoint presentation that will hopefully answer some of the questions that you may have. So essentially, we're going to have an overview of ALPR, and we're going to talk a little bit about the draft policy that some of you have a copy of. In this PowerPoint slide, you can actually see what a typical ALPR camera would look like when it's attached to the light bar of a police vehicle. I was hoping to show a very brief video as part of this, but it looks like there's a different version of PowerPoint on this computer, so I'm going to access it in a different way. This video, yes.
Sorry, can you dim the lights a little bit?
Possibly. Yes.
Assuming I know how to do this.
The reason I'm using this video, and it's kind of a cartoon and it's got some humor in it, but it very succinctly discusses ALPRs and what they do and don't do in a way that I probably couldn't do. And it's done in a way that's very easy to understand. I apologize in advance if any of you think that I'm kind of dumbing things down. That's not the intent. It's really just to kind of get everybody on the same page, and then I'll clarify any of the points that were made in the video. It takes a little less than 2 minutes to watch.
Alright class, open your books to page 1 of License Plate Recognition 101. Let's learn the facts about LPR. LPR means License Plate Recognition. It's a technology currently being used by law enforcement across the country. Here's law enforcement today without LPR. Here's life with LPR. What information is collected by an LPR system?
LPR collects your medical records, your social security number, your mother's bank account, the address of your high school sweetheart.
Not exactly. Here's how it really works. LPR technology only scans license plates. There's no personal information. LPR has multiple legal precedents already upholding the legality of its use, and the fact that it does not violate an individual's privacy. So how is collected historical LPR data used? Well, some people think it's used like this. Some people want you to think that it's being used to track innocent civilians like the Smithsons enjoying a nice day in the park. No, I don't think so. Here's how it works. LPR has been used to solve literally hundreds of thousands of crimes across the country. It is historical data that helps an investigator, with a permissible purpose, to piece together the puzzle. Thanks to many dedicated men and women in uniform, sometimes these puzzles bring a child home safely to the parents, foil a terrorist plot, identify a murderer before they strike again, or break up a narcotics operation before the drugs hit the street. Now, let's review. Does LPR invade your privacy? No. But it does save lives.
Again, I apologize if some of you think that was an oversimplification, but I think it hits on a lot of the points that we think are valid from the police department's viewpoint. So what is being recorded? This is an example of what.
I'm trying.
Just keep going. This is an example of the type of information that would be recorded by an ALPR camera. It's going to take a picture of the license plate and the vehicle that the license plate is attached to. It records the license plate number. It also records the date, the time, and the GPS coordinates of where the vehicle was located at the time the picture was taken. So I know some people are concerned about whether or not there's any images of occupants of vehicles or anyone around a vehicle. And to answer that, it could happen. That's not the intent of the camera, but it really is dependent upon distance from the vehicle, the angle at which the picture is taken, and certainly if there, for example, in the picture on the right-hand side, if somebody had been standing just adjacent to that vehicle, there certainly could be a picture of a person captured by the ALPR camera. What it doesn't do, however, is it doesn't record any information regarding the registered owner of the vehicle. There is none. It's just the plate number itself. And the only time that law enforcement would go into a database that we collect on license plates would be if we had a legitimate law enforcement purpose, such as investigating a crime, looking for a missing person, something along those lines. So if there was never any reason to look at that particular license plate, the police would never see the picture of the person next to the car. And there's no way to connect the individual to the license plate, except by going through another data point, such as the DMV files. So why does the police department want to use ALPR? There's a number of reasons. First of all, about 70% of all crimes involve the use of a vehicle, whether that's the taking of a vehicle being used by the perpetrators of the crime, a vehicle being used as a getaway. And this information comes from the International Association of Police Chiefs. Essentially, ALPR provides for rapid scanning and real-time comparison with hot lists, again, such as stolen vehicle system lists, National Crime Information Center wanted persons, terrorism watch lists, things of that nature. Again, it's a real-time comparison as an officer is driving in his or her vehicle that passes a license plate that alerts the officer to one of those that I just mentioned. They'll know about it. There'll be an alarm that will signal, and then it'll be up to the officer to verify that the information is correct, and they have to take further investigative steps before they take any action. We consider ALPR to be essentially a force multiplier. It doesn't allow us to do anything more than what we currently are allowed to do legally. It just allows us to do it in a much more efficient and rapid manner. A police officer can drive down a public street, your neighborhood or business district, and record license plate numbers that are seen in public. There is no expectation of privacy in public, and your license plate number is not confidential information. Another aspect of ALPR is the historical data that it captures, and we consider that to be a very important investigative tool. We may not realize at the time that license plate number is captured that it may have been involved in a crime or may be involved in a future crime, but that data could be useful in the future when we're doing some kind of a criminal investigation. ALPR does not identify individuals, and I can't stress that enough. It only takes pictures of and records license plates. It does not include personal identifying information or PII, and there is no expectation of privacy when you're in a public place. You can be, as an individual, can be filmed in a public place. The police can film you, you can film the police. There's nothing illegal about that. It doesn't track anyone, and it certainly doesn't track innocent individuals. Tracking would be something that we would consider with the use of a GPS tracking device that requires a search warrant and obviously probable cause. That's not what this is. It simply takes a snapshot of your license plate on your vehicle at a specific time at a specific place. You've had a chance, hopefully, to look at our APD policy, and I'd like to just briefly talk about the policy that we have. And it is relatively brief, but it is considered to be the best practices in law enforcement. We subscribe to a company that is called Lexipol, and they do police department policies across the U.S. And essentially their policies fall into three different guidelines. They're either the best practice, or they're a federal law, or they're a state law. And we update them every 6 months, so twice a year. And the draft policy that we put out is essentially what their recommended policy is for the state of California. Now, we do have some leeway. We can make some adjustments to that, and that's why we're here, to listen to what everyone here has to say. And we can certainly, as long as it doesn't violate any federal law or state law, we can certainly make some adjustments to the policy. The policy does call for the access being restricted to official and legitimate law enforcement business. We will have some kind of a login and password protected system. We're limiting the retention of the data to 1 year, which is the same as the NCRIC policy, which I'm sure Brian will talk about in a little bit. Now you might ask, well, why would you keep it for a year? Again, that goes back to the historical data being useful for future criminal investigations. Now, personally, I'd love to have the data forever, because you never know what might happen. And I understand that data retention is part of what people are concerned about. And so we feel that the policy of keeping it for 1 year is a very good compromise, and that's NCRIC's policy, and we think it's a good one. So that's why we're going to stick with that as well. We're going to require training for all officers that are seeking access to the database, and we will conduct regular system audits of the database to make sure that it's being used properly at all times. There are a number of success stories that I could go into in more detail. I'm going to try to limit this to the 5 minutes that Alex talked about. I will tell you about just one success story that's very recent. This past Friday, the San Leandro Police Department received a wanted persons bulletin that the Alameda Police Department had sent out in relation to a series of commercial burglaries that had occurred in our city. It was a string of 3 of them. It was a subject that was known to the San Leandro Police Department. They had a vehicle that they knew was attached to that individual, and so they entered that license plate number into their ALPR hot list. They then went and searched areas of their city and the neighboring city of Oakland where the border was, to locations where that person was known to frequent, and sure enough, they got a hit with their ALPR onboard computer, and were able to subsequently take the person into custody. And that's just as recent as this last Friday. So with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
So that's Brian from NCRIC. I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge that we have 2 more council members join us, Stuart Chen and Tony Desar. So so we have 4 council members in the room now, and this is not a noticed meeting of the council. Oh, wait. So I get to do something now that I will probably never, ever have the chance to do again.
What is a noticed meeting at the council?
It's publicly noticed that we're going to have council members have a forum meeting. This is a public forum. So no, it's okay. You can stay. I just get to do something I'll never get to do again, and ask the 2 of you to not speak. But please listen, observe, take notes. Wow, that will never happen again.
Have a good memory, Alex.
Good evening. As I was introduced, my name is Brian Rodriguez. I'm with the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, but I'm assigned full-time to the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center in San Francisco, NCRIC, or kind of NCRIC conversationally. One quick slide about who we are. One big lesson that came after 2001 was the government really saw some room for improvement when it came to collaboration and cooperation among kind of local police departments and sheriff's agencies. And so that's where kind of the idea of this Fusion Center was born. We develop those partnerships and encourage the local agencies to work together. And so to accomplish that, we are staffed by representatives from all the local agencies, Oakland, San Francisco, Marin, Alameda County, Contra Costa. Like I said, I'm from San Mateo. we all come together, we share our strengths, we talk about our deficiencies, and try to really solve problems from an entire regional Bay Area perspective. One tool that's become really popular within the Bay Area, including most of the major cities and all the sheriff's departments, is use of automated license plate readers. As was covered previously, this really automates processes that were previously done manually, making them more effective, more efficient, and non-discriminatory in that process. The two primary cases where these assist law enforcement, the first is that instant feedback alert. When the LPR scans a plate that comes back as stolen, comes back as an amber alert, comes back as a stolen plate, the officer is able to corroborate that information among CLETs, call dispatch, verify the accuracy, and then potentially pursue the vehicle, make an arrest, recover the vehicle right there on the spot. Secondly, the archived historical information has investigative uses as well. You mentioned a topic before of the commercial burglaries that had a similar MO. You're able to canvass those crime scenes, find plates in common, and get that information out. We can locate suspects. We have partial and complete vehicle descriptions. Those can be used to cross-reference against the LPR imagery and complete that vehicle description, complete that partial plate. It's got a few stats and success stories. Up in Marin County, where LPR is used extensively, last year in 2013, they recovered about 340 of 380 stolen vehicles. That's almost a 90% recovery rate. The California average is closer to 60, and it's closer to 50% nationally. So that's really impressive up there. Piedmont made an extensive investment in LPR within the last few months. Since they've deployed the system, they've seen an increase, not just in their stolen recovery, but especially in their what they call rolling recoveries, right? They're getting these vehicles with the bad guys still inside, and not just after they've been abandoned on the side of the road. Additionally, they've seen a 20% reduction in the burglary and in their larceny. If you'll permit me to be a little bit speculative, commonly the reason a vehicle is stolen is so the perpetrator can then use that to commit another crime. And so if we're able to stop that vehicle and recover it, potentially you're getting some preemptive reduction in crime following suit. Looking at historical data, there was a great case out of Daly City where they had hit and run on a child. All they had was a partial plate and vehicle description. Ran that through the LPR to see what potential matches they had in the area on that time. It wasn't the first, it wasn't the second, but the third door they knocked on. Sure enough, they found a driver. If I'm one of those first two people, I'm probably a little annoyed and maybe a little scared, but I think in the end the trade-off is worth it to make that case. We had a situation with a sex predator in San Francisco that was potentially a danger to children. We would run that against the LPR, found the individual had been parking and frequenting near parks and playgrounds, and they were able to pursue that to make an arrest, violating the terms of his release. And lastly, there was a multiple murder cold case kind of out of the peninsula where ALPR historical data was used to defeat what was a fictitious alibi. Again, just some examples, and there'll be a lot more to come as this technology is adopted more throughout the area and we see more collaboration and cooperation, like that previous story between San Leandro and Alameda, that as we work together, it really multiplies the effectiveness of this tool. But as also was said, like any law enforcement tool, you have to weigh the good against the potential for harm and the risk that it brings if it's misused or not used properly. Every resource, every system that police departments have, their computer systems, their weapon, their vehicle, their armor, even facial hair, there are rules, there are punishments, there are regulations if you don't follow those. And so the same thing applies to license plate readers, and it's great to see Alameda getting out ahead of that, whereas a lot of other jurisdictions may have adopted this tool and turned it up without having any paperwork in place beforehand. So they're really doing this right by taking all those concerns to heart and having the paperwork there in place at the time. So NCRIC is here to assist that, just kind of give them a head start or give them a sounding board in terms of how you can more effectively utilize the data through sharing with your local partners. If we have a stolen vehicle in Oakland and it shows up in Alameda, we'll be able to get that alert and notify both agencies, or vice versa. If there's an abduction or an amber alert here in Alameda, and then that plate is seen in Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, we'll be able to get the notification out and make a stop. And then to assist with development of the privacy policies, the restrictions, and really besides just the human procedural elements, to be able to put controls within the system that really protects and archives out that data unless you truly have a legitimate law enforcement purpose to open it up and go back through it. In the interest of time, really, these are the three most common privacy questions and concerns that come up from the ACLU and the general public in terms of who's working with the data, what are they doing for it, and how long does it exist in the system. So the practices that the NCRIC is putting in place is we're keeping it entirely law enforcement through and through. Only given to law enforcement, every user is individually vetted, they must have a justified law enforcement purpose and an active case to access any archive or retain data. We don't share with the private sector, we don't sell to, there's no tow companies, no skip tracers, nothing. Just law enforcement for law enforcement purposes. And again, all audit, all use, every login is all audited, so we can turn that over to the agencies. They can verify that the activity is proper and in line with the wishes of their chief, their city council, their citizens. Lastly, how long is data retained? This is probably the hardest question to answer. In California, there are no laws or rules that would apply to a police department, a sheriff's department, or even a private company about how long you can retain LPR data or what you can do with it. Some other states, Vermont, they have rules that provide them with 18 months. New Jersey, it's 5 years. New Hampshire, they can't keep the data at all. And in Maine, it's only 21 days. So given this kind of flexibility, most California agencies are actually going with 24 months. Here in the Bay Area, the NCRIC partners were trying to line everybody at 12. But if you look over in Contra Costa County, Santa Clara County, Los Angeles, and most of Southern California, they're sticking with 2 years. And that's citing Government Code 34090, which basically says law enforcement can't delete anything within less than 2 years. And that's to protect evidence, protect police procedures for audit, for discovery, for transparency. The CHP is one notable exception. They were recently limited to what I feel is an overly strict 60-day retention. Where did 12 months come from? Well, like I said, in the absence of clear laws, rules, regulations pertaining to LPR, we're just kind of borrowing from similar things that are in place. So the California Attorney General has guidelines about data that is not criminal intelligence, and you're only allowed to keep that for 1 year, at which point it has to be purged. Going back to 34090, subsection 6, as an exception for routine video surveillance or video imaging, which kind of sounds like LPR, the camera, their video images. So again, you see the 12-month come up there. And so we've chosen to use that going forward until, of course, some kind of law is passed where the AG follows up. And whatever specific laws are passed specific to ALPR, of course, we'll follow. But in the meantime, this is kind of the position we're taking. Lastly, other things pertaining to California Highway Patrol. We adopt their policy of not selling what we're sharing to the private sector, and then, of course, monitoring all use and auditing and tracking it all. There's my contact information. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email me. Also, the privacy officer email's up there. That's not me. He is a lawyer, unlike myself, so probably bug him first. But thank you for your time today.
Matt from the ACLU.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Cagle, and I'm an attorney with the ACLU of Northern California. Could I do my rebuttal during my 5 minutes? Thank you. Thanks. So I want to thank the City of Alameda and the City Council for hosting this public forum and for encouraging public debate on automated license plate readers before they're actually adopted and rolled out in Alameda. I want to use my time in addition to my rebuttal to make 2 points. First, the reason that's being cited in favor of the adoption of ALPR is precisely why it allows us to invade our privacy. ALPR is a very powerful force multiplier, and this enables law enforcement to piece together a detailed mosaic about Alamedans and visitors to Alameda, their movements through public space. And these people often haven't engaged in any wrongdoing whatsoever. The officers, like you and the gentleman from NCRIC cited, these instances where we've used automated license plate readers to apprehend somebody who's been suspected of a crime. Well, that's a unique situation where that person has been suspected of a crime, and the license plate associated with that person has been placed in a hot list. So that's different than collecting everyone's information, which is how these ALPR devices are being rolled out. And my second point would be that Alameda's 2-page, it's just 2 pages, and it's about actually 1.5 pages. Their draft policy on ALPR places minimal constraints on the use of this technology, and that we believe invites misuse of this technology. So first I'm going to turn to the capabilities of ALPR, which our other 2 presenters have already discussed somewhat. These high-speed cameras, they're capable of recording thousands of images per minute even, if there are that many cars driving by, which there usually aren't, but they're very capable of recording in very high succession and speed the picture of the license plate and attaching the location to that. A single Alameda patrol car equipped with ALPR will be able to record the numbers and locations of thousands of plates per hour. Alameda has a very small geographic footprint, as everyone here knows, and a very small population. And that would allow one single ALPR unit to record a single resident's data more than once if the system were operated over time. And we've seen this in Piedmont, another city that you've probably heard has adopted ALPR technology. That city has just under 11,000 residents, yet that city has retained over 3 million license plates. So it's safe to assume that those plates, individual residents, are likely to have appeared in that database more than once. And so you get pins on a map that place that citizens' movements around town. ALPR will also allow Alameda to create a rich database of information about its residents. Without safeguards limiting the collection, use, and retention of this information, this database could be queried to learn whether a resident went from their home to a therapist or from a therapist to an abortion clinic, for instance. Of course, this technology has legitimate law enforcement uses, such as Amber Alerts or looking for felony warrants or stolen vehicles, which are some of the examples that have been cited already. And the ACLU recognizes that Alameda seeks ALPR only for its legitimate law enforcement uses. We do recognize that. Still, we want to highlight that without proper safeguards in place, this technology is just wide open for misuse and even abuse. This technology is in its infancy right now, and it will advance, and Chief Roleri will not always be the custodian of the technology here in the city. And so it's really necessary to place safeguards on the use of the technology that will be able to evolve as the technology gets even more effective, and will be able to, limit the abuse of discretion or misuse without intent to abuse as staff changes in the police department. So to move on to the current draft policy, as drafted, this draft policy fails to put the safeguards in place that I've been trying to articulate are necessary to control for the misuse of the technology. If you have the policy, or if you've looked at it, you'll notice that it directs officers to use ALPR in and around major incidents. Well, what is a major incident? The policy doesn't actually specify what a major incident is. A major incident could be a political protest. It could be your car's in the parking lot because you have chosen to attend a public forum on license plate reader technology. The policy also requires the retention of data for 1 year, which both speakers have already touched on. I'll use part of my rebuttal time here. In fact, that law that says California Government Code, I believe it is 34090.6, has never been interpreted by a California court or a federal court to apply to automated license plate reader technology. And we would argue that routine video monitoring actually doesn't even encompass the use of a new sort of technology that's placed on a patrol car and that monitors every single resident whose plate drives by the camera. I believe routine video monitoring, it's more reasonable to think that it actually is talking about the dashboard cams, for instance, that would be in patrol cars on the street. And in addition, we just in 2012, there was a case called US v. Jones, and in US v. Jones, the Supreme Court looked at the use of a GPS tracker, which one of the speakers said, that you require a warrant based on probable cause for the use of the GPS tracker. Well, in that court, the law enforcement went to the court and said, we don't need this because they're moving through public spaces and there's no legitimate expectation of privacy in public space. And the Supreme Court said, you're wrong. You need to get a warrant here. And although they decided the case on a different set of grounds, there are 5 justices who agreed that our perception, as technology gets better and can collect different pins on a map where we've moved, those justices agreed that our constitutional law must evolve, and it is in the process of evolving right now. But constitutional law is unclear, and the courts are still grappling with this issue, and that is why it's even more necessary and essential that Alameda put good safeguards in place, because where there lacks clarity, misuse could happen. So that's part of my rebuttal, and I'll continue on quickly here. The policy manual also allows data about Alameda residents to be shared with federal intelligence, and that would be NCRIC, the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. As part of an agreement that Alameda is considering, but I don't believe has entered into with NCRIC, the agencies who are also who have also signed memoranda of understanding with NCRIC would provide Alameda with access to their own records. And this means that other law enforcement from other cities could query that database, and it looks kind of like Google Maps. You type in the license plate number, and it brings up pins on a map of, say, the Bay Area of where that car has been. Well, under this agreement, other cities' law enforcement will be able to do that to Alameda's residence plates that have been uploaded to the Regional Fusion Center database that was originally intended for, creating better communication amongst law enforcement to prevent terrorism, but has somehow evolved into a database that would collect all records of your license plate and location, regardless of whether you're suspected of terrorism. And so finally, I just want to say, thank you to Alameda for hosting this public debate, and for the chief for being so open to sitting down with ACLU and talking about these issues before Alameda's, rushed forward with this sort of technology. And there are legitimate uses, but this policy manual falls far short of that and just really doesn't articulate, the purposes that you, the community, would be seeking out these readers for in the first place, or the safeguards that should be placed on those purposes to make sure that that use doesn't step beyond that. And so, before before ALPR cars hit the streets, it's really important for this debate and this discussion to continue, for purposes to be articulated that say this is why we need ALPR, and for those purposes to be articulated inside of a policy that really constrains the use of this technology. And if the city does decide, based on that discussion, that ALPR is necessary, then you adopt those safeguards and you ensure it's used only for those purposes that the city has decided are appropriate. So, I think, and the ACLU thinks that Alameda has a great opportunity to be a model for this process of considering a new surveillance technology, regardless of whether you decide to adopt it or not. And we thank the city chief and the council for allowing us to speak. And and we look forward to continuing this discussion. Thanks.
Okay, does anyone here have anything to add or respond to?
I think, Matt, first time and first thoughts on the ACLU for being here, and really for their excellent report that they've put out. And we adopted a lot of our policies and things that we consider really based on sort of that cohesive stating of the concerns of the public in the ACLU. There's kind of a misconception out there, and I'll blame CBS and TV on this, but the law enforcement moves very quickly and cases are resolved very fast. And that's just not the case. And so when you start talking about shorter retention windows and less time, in the real world, the amount of time it takes for a victim to come forward, for another witness to come forward, for maybe an accomplice to be flipped and then provide additional information to law enforcement, that is something that rarely happens in a matter of weeks or months. It often takes years more than that to define. And so the longer we're able to keep this data, the more of those types of cases that can be made. And to look at only hot list information where the crime has happened, the plate has occurred, that information has made it up to the Department of Justice and then been synchronized back down to the ALPR reader, that there's so many prerequisites that need to be made ahead of time for that to happen, that if you were to limit this tool to really only looking at that data, you're severely crippling its capabilities in that regard. And then lastly, to touch on U.S. versus Jones, there's an order of magnitude difference between what a true GPS tracker can do and what an LPR is capable of collecting. And I think it's really unfortunate that the ACLU really chooses to use that T-word, tracking in association with LPR devices. When anything GPS is going to be pinging back multiple times a minute, producing thousands and tens of thousands of data points on an individual over the course of days or months. In practice, what we've seen is it's a handful of records on any one given plate, typically even less than that. And so it's important to know that there's a massive distinction between the two, and you shouldn't necessarily bump them at the same time.
just wanted to add a couple of things really quickly. As Brian pointed out, and I think Matt acknowledged, the case law for LPRs is still kind of an evolving animal. This isn't, it's still a relatively new technology for all of us. The agencies that are using it haven't had it for very long, at least not in the Bay Area. This is a relatively new thing for us. So the reason why the draft policy is a draft policy and it's only 2 pages long is because there really isn't a whole lot of case law to speak of. David spoke earlier about the Lexipol company that we subscribe with to help develop our policies. Federal law, state law, and then best practices. There isn't a lot there right now. We're trying to do what we can to put this out so that everybody can digest it. I'm not trying to spy on anybody. We're not trying to spy on anyone. If we were, we wouldn't be having this discussion. For what it's worth, I just want to try to assure all of you that we have the best of intentions. I'm a public safety agency. I'm running a public safety agency. When I go home at night, I take my uniform off, and I'm just like everybody else in this room. I get concerned when I go to CVS and I have to scan my driver's license to buy cold medication. It bothers me. So I understand the concerns. I get it. And trying to find a sweet spot, when I met with Linda and Matt last week, we talked about finding a sweet spot. What's the right retention period? I'll tell you, I'll be honest, I don't know. We're still trying to figure it out. I think that I would like to start with a 1 year, and then I had mentioned to Linda that I'm willing to go back, and because we do revise our policies twice a year, and say, hey, after a little while, if this isn't working out, then we can adjust it up or we can adjust it down. I think it's also important to point out that when Matt referred to pin maps that can be, and mosaics that can be constructed all over the place, when we scan, or when the ALPRs scan these license plates, they don't have personal identifying information. It doesn't tell you that the car belongs to Paul Roleri at 123 Main Street. It doesn't tell you where Paul's supposed to be. It doesn't tell you where Paul lives. It doesn't say anything except that that plate on that car was in that spot at that time. That's it. If I want to know anything more about that, I have to go into a separate database, which, for those of you who don't know, the police department already has access to. And then, with a legal purpose, run that license plate to find out more information about that car. That's when I'd find out it belongs to Paul and where Paul lives. It's not a turn-by-turn, as Brian described, it's not a turn-by-turn tracking device. If that were true, every arrest, every case that's ever been cleared with LPR would be thrown out, because it would require a search warrant signed by a judge based on probable cause. If that ever changes, then the policy will automatically adjust, because when Lexipol does this, they stay current with federal and state law. So every 6 months, I think it's February and September, when those things come out, we'd be able to review them and make the adjustments as necessary. I really do, I can't stress this enough. I would like to get this technology and put this policy in place to make this town as safe as it can be. And criminals don't always commit crimes and stay in their backyard. They move around. Our burglar that we spoke about that we caught last week, it was actually 5 burglaries. And he's also, we believe, responsible for some in some other communities, which is why San Leandro knew of him. They move around. And that's why it's important for us to be able to share that information with the other agencies in the area, because people move around from Hayward to San Leandro to Castro Valley. Suspects don't stay in one place very long. That's what makes them successful for a little while. It's just a tool to try to help us track people down in a more efficient manner. I mentioned this at council back in October. I'm not interested in cheating spouses. I'm not interested in massage parlors or cannabis clubs. That's what you hire private investigators for. We're a public safety agency. I don't care about that. And I know that Matt said, well, I may not always be the chief. That's true. I'd like to stay here forever, but no, I won't be. But when we put these policies in place, it's so that whoever's in charge of the police department, whoever's working there, we all abide by the same policies. There's a little bit of a trust factor here. And I get it. Some people don't trust law enforcement. I don't know how to get past that right now, except to tell you that that's not what our intention is. And if I wanted to just, or the city wanted to just implement the policy and roll this out, we would have done it. There's no rush. There's no rush to do this. We started having these conversations probably in May or June of last year. And I spoke to the council, submitted a report on October 1st, submitted the draft policy in December, and here we are in February talking about it. We're not in a big rush to do this. I'd like to do it, you know, in the near future, but I'm not in a rush. I'm not going to roll this out next week. So be patient with us. We will develop a policy. It may never be exactly what everybody wants, but hopefully somewhere between where the ACLU is and where we are right now, we can meet somewhere closer to the middle and find some happy middle ground until we get it right. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to transition into all of you. So let me first get a sense, how many people have a comment or a question for any of our presenters? Great, okay, so I'm not going to pull my hair out and try to moderate.